Imagine standing in the stillness of a room where words no longer arrive, where voices fade, and where silence stretches long enough to feel like it might swallow you. For empaths, this is not just absence, it is a test. And yet, within this very quiet, there lies a hidden doorway, a doorway to wisdom, growth, and divine understanding. When someone turns inward and retreats into silence, it is easy to feel abandoned, rejected, or even punished. But consider this: the universe often speaks to us through what is not said. Silence is not a void, it is a message wrapped in stillness. It is an invitation to pause, to examine our own reactions, and to ask, am I seeking control or am I learning patience? Am I projecting my fears or am I observing truth? Empaths, listen carefully. Your sensitivity is a sacred gift, yet it is also your crucible. When silence lands like a weight on your chest, it is a mirror reflecting your own growth. Every moment of discomfort is a sacred nudge to check your boundaries, to honor your energy, and to step into a space of conscious choice. You are not required to fill the silence. You are required to understand it. Do not mistake absence for abandonment. Do not mistake quiet for failure. Sometimes silence is the universe's way of teaching you to breathe without external validation, to trust without evidence, and to love without immediate reciprocity. It is a call to cultivate patience so profound that it aligns your spirit with higher purpose. There will be moments when silence tests you, pushing, prodding, even tempting you to overextend yourself emotionally. These moments are not punishments, they are invitations. They are asking, will you remain anchored in your inner truth? Will you honor your energy while holding space for another's journey? Will you transform discomfort into clarity and fear into wisdom? Understand this: the silent spaces are where your resilience is forged. They are where your discernment sharpens. They are where the divine whispers the language of growth. Every moment you resist reacting, every moment you observe without judgment, every moment you choose presence over projection, you step closer to mastery over yourself. You step closer to the profound truth that not all tests come in storms. Some arrive as gentle, unspoken lessons in patience, empathy, and sacred timing. So when silence descends, do not shrink. Stand firm, breathe deeply, listen beyond the absence, and know that what feels like a test is often a blessing, cloaked in stillness, preparing you for a higher expression of love, wisdom, and power. Let this silence transform you, refine you, and awaken the divine clarity that only those who are willing to be still can ever know. Silence is one of the most misunderstood forms of communication, yet it is profoundly powerful, especially when it comes from someone who is emotionally avoidant. At first glance, silence may seem like emptiness, a void where words should exist. But in reality, silence is never truly empty. It carries meaning, intention, and energy. It is a reflection of inner processing, a signal of unresolved fears, or a mechanism of self-preservation. To understand avoidant silence, we must first recognize that it is not merely the absence of words, but a complex expression of the human psyche. People retreat into silence for many reasons. Some are processing emotions they cannot yet articulate. They may be overwhelmed, confused, or uncertain, and speaking prematurely could lead to conflict or vulnerability that they are not ready to face. Others use silence as a form of self-protection, a way to create distance from situations or people that feel threatening or emotionally taxing. In these moments, silence acts as a shield, giving the individual space to regroup and regain balance. For empaths, who are naturally sensitive to emotional undercurrents, avoidant silence can feel like a storm, even if the person remaining silent is simply taking time to process internally. The empath's instinct is to seek clarity, to fill the gap, or to restore connection immediately, but this approach often clashes with the nature of avoidant silence. Recognizing that silence is purposeful, not punitive, is the first step toward understanding its true significance. Avoidant silence communicates something essential about the state of the person retreating. It signals a boundary, whether conscious or unconscious, and it demands respect. Ignoring or misinterpreting this boundary can lead to misunderstandings, frustration, or emotional exhaustion. Understanding silence requires patience and observation, The empath must learn to read the subtle cues surrounding silence, tone, body language, and context to grasp what the absence of words is conveying. Silence may indicate fear, discomfort, the need for reflection, or even a test of emotional endurance. It may also reveal deeper patterns, such as avoidance of intimacy, fear of confrontation, or difficulty expressing vulnerability. By observing without rushing to interpret or fix, an empath can decode the silent message without compromising their own emotional balance. Silence is not always a reflection of the relationship itself. Sometimes it is a mirror of the silent person's internal world. Their retreat into quiet may have nothing to do with the empath's actions or character, and everything to do with unresolved issues, past trauma, or personal growth processes. Recognizing this distinction allows empaths to avoid unnecessary self-blame and maintain clarity. Furthermore, understanding avoidant silence encourages the development of emotional resilience. It teaches the empath to tolerate uncertainty and ambiguity, to hold space for another without losing themselves in the process. It invites reflection. Why does this silence trigger discomfort? What boundaries or attachments are being challenged? Through this reflection, the empath gains insight into their own emotional patterns, enhancing self-awareness and spiritual growth. Ultimately, avoidant silence is not a problem to solve or a void to fill. It is a form of communication that conveys as much as words might, albeit indirectly. By approaching it with curiosity, patience, and empathy, one can uncover the underlying messages, discern patterns, and respect the sacred need for space. It is a subtle, often challenging, but deeply enlightening form of expression, teaching that silence can be both protective and instructive, offering insight into human nature, emotional dynamics, and the delicate balance between connection and autonomy. Recognizing its depth is the gateway to true understanding, patience, and emotional mastery. Empaths are born with a profound ability to sense, absorb, and feel the emotions of those around them. This sensitivity is both a gift and a challenge, particularly when it comes to encountering avoidant silence. For empaths, silence is rarely neutral. It carries emotional weight, triggers internal narratives, and often prompts deep introspection. The empath's mind and heart instinctively seek to decode every subtle nuance, every unspoken word, and every pause. This heightened awareness is a reflection of their innate attunement to human energy, but it also creates unique challenges in navigating silence, especially when the other person is emotionally avoidant. When someone retreats into silence, the empath often experiences a cascade of internal responses. They may feel a sudden sense of urgency to restore communication, an almost irresistible drive to fill the void with words, reassurance, or emotional labor. This compulsion is not born from mere curiosity. It emerges from the empath's deep desire to maintain harmony and connection. Silence for an empath is never merely the absence of sound. It becomes an emotional landscape that they instinctively inhabit. This sensitivity can lead empaths to internalize the silence as a reflection of themselves, even when it has nothing to do with their actions, character, or worth. They may replay interactions repeatedly, trying to pinpoint a misstep or a hidden cause, and often end up carrying the emotional burden of someone else's withdrawal. Over time, this pattern can lead to exhaustion, confusion, and self-doubt, making it essential for empaths to develop discernment and self-awareness. Understanding their own emotional responses is critical. Empaths must recognize when the urge to interpret or resolve silence stems from their own internalized need for reassurance rather than from a genuine insight into the other person's experience. This distinction is vital because it prevents them from overextending themselves emotionally or creating false narratives that exacerbate anxiety or frustration. Additionally, empaths must learn to differentiate between their empathetic resonance with another person's feelings and their projections onto the silence. Often, the absence of communication is a reflection of the other person's internal process, not a judgment or commentary on the empath. By developing this awareness, empaths can protect their energy while still maintaining compassion and presence. Another important aspect is the empath's capacity for patience. Sensitivity does not always necessitate immediate action or intervention. In fact, the ability to sit with discomfort, hold space, and resist the urge to react can transform how empaths experience silence. When approached with mindfulness, silence becomes a mirror, reflecting not only the other person's needs, but also the empath's own inner growth opportunities. Silence, therefore, is not a threat to connection, but an invitation to practice self-regulation, emotional resilience, and conscious observation. Furthermore, empaths can use silence as a tool for cultivating boundaries. By observing where their energy is being drawn into another person's avoidance patterns, they can make deliberate choices about how much emotional labor to invest, when to step back, and how to maintain equilibrium. This process strengthens their emotional intelligence, deepens self-understanding, and enhances their ability to engage with others without losing themselves. Ultimately, the empath's experience of avoidant silence is a dance of sensitivity and discernment, intuition, and reflection. It teaches them to honor both their gift and their limits, to distinguish between genuine connection and projections, and to embrace the transformative potential of patience and self-awareness. By approaching silence with curiosity and clarity, empaths can navigate the complex terrain of human emotion with grace, preserving their energy while deepening their capacity for empathy, understanding, and authentic connection. Silence can be one of the most confusing experiences in human relationships, especially for those attuned to emotional energy. For an empath, it is not simply an absence of sound. It carries layers of meaning, intention, and emotional weight. When silence occurs, one of the most important questions arises. Is this a reflection of growth or a deliberate test of patience and resilience? Understanding the distinction is crucial because it shapes how one responds, interprets, and integrates the experience. Silence can serve as a mirror for personal growth, offering an opportunity to examine one's emotional patterns, attachment habits, and boundaries. In these moments, the empath is invited to pause and reflect rather than react. Growth does not happen through constant stimulation or interaction. It emerges when there is space to observe, process, and gain clarity. The silence becomes a teacher, revealing not only the other person's inner state, but also the empath's responses to uncertainty, discomfort, and the unknown. When approached as growth, silence becomes a tool for cultivating patience, self-awareness, and emotional maturity. It encourages an individual to ask deeper questions. Why do I feel compelled to fill this void? What fears are surfacing in response to this absence? How can I maintain my center without overextending my energy? These reflections allow the empath to move from reactive patterns to conscious engagement, recognizing that not all discomfort needs immediate resolution. On the other hand, silence can sometimes function as a test, a challenge to the empath's boundaries, discernment, and resilience. In these cases, the absence of communication may provoke overthinking, insecurity, or self-doubt, particularly if the empath interprets it as rejection or a reflection of personal inadequacy. Recognizing when silence is a test rather than a space for growth requires attunement and discernment. It involves observing patterns rather than isolated incidents, noticing whether the silence consistently triggers emotional overextension, and evaluating whether engagement feels balanced, or draining. When silence is a test, it presents a choice: to give in to reactive behaviors, losing one's energy in the process, or to remain anchored in personal truth, honoring both one's boundaries and the other person's process. This distinction between growth and test is subtle and often intertwined. Sometimes, silence carries elements of both. It can challenge an empath while simultaneously providing opportunities for reflection and learning. The key is not to seek absolute certainty about the intentions behind the silence, but to cultivate awareness of one's own responses. By observing how silence affects emotions, thoughts, and energy, the empath gains insight into their own patterns, triggers, and strengths. This insight, in turn, fosters empowerment and conscious choice. Furthermore, understanding the dual nature of silence encourages empaths to embrace patience, trust, and discernment. It reminds them that control over outcomes is an illusion, and that true growth arises from alignment with one's inner principles rather than external validation. When approached with this perspective, silence ceases to feel like a void to be feared or fixed. Instead, it becomes a sacred space where clarity emerges, resilience strengthens, and wisdom deepens. Ultimately, whether silence is growth or a test, the empath's response determines its transformative potential. By remaining present, observing without judgment, and honoring both their own energy and the process of the other person, empaths can turn even the most challenging silences into profound lessons. They learn that discomfort can be instructive, uncertainty can be clarifying, and the absence of words can speak volumes, revealing truths about human nature, connection, and the inner landscapes of both self and others. This understanding equips the empath with the ability to navigate silence not as a threat, but as an opportunity for personal evolution, emotional mastery, and spiritual alignment. In the presence of silence, especially when it is avoidant or prolonged, the challenge is not merely external, it is deeply internal. The human tendency is to react, to fill voids, to demand answers, or to wrestle control from uncertainty. Yet, true mastery of such moments arises from cultivating patience, a quality that is both spiritual and practical. Divine patience is not passive waiting. It is an active practice of presence, trust, and alignment with higher principles. It requires the recognition that life, relationships, and personal growth follow rhythms far greater than our immediate understanding. When someone withdraws into silence, the instinct may be to interpret it as rejection, failure, or disconnection. But within the spiritual framework, silence is rarely an end. It is a signal, an invitation to slow down, to observe, and to engage with life at a deeper level. It asks the empath or sensitive individual to surrender the compulsion to control outcomes and to embrace trust in timing, both their own and that of others. Practicing divine patience involves understanding that every being has a unique path of processing, reflection, and healing. When silence arises, it often reflects an inner journey of the other person, whether they are grappling with unresolved emotions, seeking clarity, or navigating personal transformation. By cultivating patience, one honors that journey without interference, allowing space for authentic expression to emerge naturally. This form of patience is neither passive nor weak. It is a conscious, powerful alignment with universal wisdom. It requires the empath to resist the urge to project fears, insecurities, or assumptions onto the silence, and instead to approach it with curiosity, compassion, and presence. Divine patience also challenges the individual to examine their own inner landscape. It is in these moments of quiet that one confronts personal attachments, fears of abandonment, or tendencies to overextend emotionally. The practice of patience, therefore, is dual. It respects the process of others while cultivating equilibrium within oneself. Learning to trust in timing is a key component. Life unfolds in cycles, and not all questions are meant to be answered immediately. Silence is often a natural rhythm, a pause that allows deeper understanding to surface. By honoring this rhythm, one aligns with the flow of life rather than resisting it, transforming tension into calm, frustration into clarity, and uncertainty into insight. Moreover, patience rooted in divine principles fosters a sense of detachment without disengagement. One can remain present, compassionate, and attentive without losing balance or becoming entangled in anxiety. This detachment is not indifference, it is clarity. It allows one to observe, to hold space, and to respond from a place of centered awareness rather than reaction. Over time, the practice of divine patience strengthens emotional resilience. It teaches the empath that discomfort, uncertainty, or absence are not threats, but opportunities for growth. By embracing stillness, one cultivates discernment, fortifies boundaries, and enhances the capacity for conscious engagement. Ultimately, patience in the face of avoidant silence transforms a potentially challenging scenario into a powerful lesson in self-mastery and spiritual alignment. It reminds us that not all communication is verbal, not all connection is immediate, and not all tests require forceful action. Silence, when approached with patience, becomes a teacher, a mirror, and a sacred space where inner strength, clarity, and understanding deepen. It is here, in the gentle surrender to timing, in the conscious choice to observe, without judgment, that one discovers the profound truth. Growth and divine alignment are not achieved through control, but through presence, trust, and the patient unfolding of life's mysteries. Setting healthy boundaries is one of the most essential, yet often overlooked skills for empaths navigating avoidant silence. When someone withdraws into quiet, it can feel as though the world has shifted beneath the empath's feet. The instinct is to bridge the gap, to reach out repeatedly, to fill the void with reassurance or understanding. Yet in doing so without discernment, an empath risks sacrificing their own energy, well-being, and emotional stability. Boundaries are not walls built to shut others out. They are sacred lines drawn to preserve clarity, integrity, and personal strength. They allow the empath to engage fully without losing themselves in the emotional currents of someone else's retreat. Avoidant silence often tests the empath's limits, inviting them to explore where their responsibility ends and where the other person's autonomy begins. Learning to recognize this distinction is foundational. Silence does not always imply rejection, disinterest, or malice. It frequently reflects the other person's inner process, their need for reflection, or a form of self-preservation. By establishing clear boundaries, the empath acknowledges the difference between honoring the other's space and overextending into emotional overdrive. Boundaries also serve as a compass for action versus reaction. When faced with silence, an empathic equipped with healthy limits can pause, reflect, and choose how to respond rather than react impulsively. They can decide when to reach out, how often to seek communication, and when to allow space to exist without attempting to control it. This conscious engagement reduces emotional exhaustion and prevents the accumulation of resentment or confusio. Moreover, setting boundaries strengthens self-respect. It sends a silent but powerful message. I value my energy, my emotions, and my well-being. In the presence of avoidant silence, this self-respect becomes a stabilizing force, preventing the empath from being swept away by the currents of uncertainty, doubt, or overanalysis. Healthy boundaries are not rigid. They are flexible frameworks that adapt to context while maintaining core principles. For example, an empath might decide to give someone a defined period of space, communicate expectations regarding contact, or choose internal reflection over external pursuit. Each of these actions honors the balance between connection and autonomy, maintaining alignment with both personal values and the dynamics of the relationship. Another dimension of boundaries is emotional discernment. Empaths often feel a compulsion to absorb the emotional weight of the silent person, interpreting every pause, gesture, or delayed response as a reflection of themselves. Boundaries help separate the empath's own emotions from the energy they perceive, allowing them to respond from clarity rather than projection. This discernment fosters deeper insight into both self and others, transforming silence from a source of anxiety into an opportunity for observation and understanding. Establishing boundaries also promotes growth in patience and trust. By resisting the urge to force engagement, the empath allows the silent person to navigate their process while simultaneously cultivating inner stability. This creates a harmonious balance where connection is possible without compromise, and the empath's energy remains intact. Ultimately, boundaries transform the experience of avoidant silence from a test of endurance into a practice of empowerment. They provide the structure necessary for empaths to engage consciously, observe without losing self, and act with integrity. Through boundaries, silence becomes not a source of frustration or fear, but a catalyst for resilience, discernment, and alignment with one's higher self. In this way, empaths learn that the power to navigate silence lies not in controlling others, but in honoring themselves while holding space for the journey of those around them, turning potential challenges into opportunities for profound personal and spiritual growth. Decoding intent versus projection is one of the most subtle yet crucial challenges for empaths navigating avoidant silence. When someone retreats into quiet, it is natural for the sensitive observer to search for meaning, to assign reasons, and to interpret motives. Yet in this process, empaths often conflate the inner reality of the other person with their own projections, fears, and assumptions. Understanding this distinction is vital, because failing to do so can lead to unnecessary emotional suffering, miscommunication, and distorted perceptions of relationships. Silence is rarely neutral. It carries energy, intention, and context, but it does not always directly relate to the empath. At times, the silent individual is processing their own emotions, fears, or personal challenges, issues that may have nothing to do with the empath's behavior or character. When an empath interprets this silence as a reflection of their own worth, they unintentionally project their insecurities onto the situation, assuming blame, rejection, or disapproval where none exists. This is projection at work, a mental overlay of internal fears onto external reality. Recognizing projection requires a disciplined awareness. Empaths must learn to pause and ask themselves, is this silence truly about the other person, or am I creating a narrative that aligns with my own anxieties? By cultivating this introspective lens, the empath can differentiate between the external signals they are receiving and the internal interpretations they are generating. This discernment transforms silence from a trigger into an opportunity for clarity. Furthermore, decoding intent versus projection involves observing patterns over time rather than reacting to isolated incidents. A single moment of avoidance may be situational, circumstantial, or unrelated, whereas repeated patterns can reveal genuine dynamics in the relationship. By stepping back and considering context, timing, and consistency, the empath can begin to accurately assess whether the silence is a reflection of the other's internal process, a boundary being tested, or a personal challenge designed to strengthen resilience. Emotional self-regulation is another essential component. The empath must manage the urge to overanalyze, over-explain, or overcompensate, which often arises from projecting personal fears onto the silent space. By grounding themselves in their own emotional center, empaths can observe without reacting, creating space to respond consciously rather than unconsciously. In practice, this means holding awareness of physical sensations, emotional triggers, and recurring thought patterns. Silence, when approached with mindful observation, becomes a mirror not of deficiency, but of awareness. It teaches the empath to separate their energy from the perceived intentions of others, reinforcing the understanding that not all challenges in connection are personal. Additionally, distinguishing between intent and projection allows empaths to cultivate compassion without over-identification. They can empathize with the other person's experience, honor the need for space, and maintain presence, all while preserving their own emotional equilibrium. This delicate balance is the hallmark of mature empathy. It allows engagement without absorption, connection without compromise, and understanding without sacrifice. Ultimately, decoding intent versus projection is a practice of clarity, patience, and self-respect. It trains the empath to navigate silence with discernment, to recognize the difference between genuine signals and internalized fears, and to respond from a grounded, conscious state. Silence, in this light, is no longer a source of anxiety or confusion. It becomes a sacred teacher, illuminating both the other person's process and the empath's own inner landscape. Through this practice, empaths strengthen their ability to perceive reality accurately, respond with wisdom rather than impulse, and transform what could be a disorienting experience into a profound journey of insight, self-mastery, and emotional resilience. In doing so, they not only honor themselves, but also elevate the quality of every relationship in which they engage. Reflection is one of the most transformative tools an empath can utilize when faced with avoidant silence. While silence can initially feel unsettling, ambiguous, or even threatening, it carries within it an invitation to slow down and examine not only the other person's intentions, but also one's own internal responses. This reflective process allows empaths to engage with life and relationships at a deeper, more conscious level. When someone withdraws into silence, the first impulse is often to interpret, analyze, or fill the gap with words and reassurance. However, true growth emerges not from reacting, but from observing. Reflection provides a sacred space to explore questions that might otherwise go unnoticed. Why does this silence trigger discomfort? What assumptions am I making about the other person? How much of my emotional reaction is my own projection? By contemplating these questions, the empath uncovers patterns in their own responses, including tendencies to overextend, self-blame, or internalize another's energy. In doing so, silence becomes more than absence. It becomes a mirror reflecting the empath's strengths, vulnerabilities, and areas of growth. Reflection also cultivates discernment, a skill that is essential for navigating complex emotional landscapes. When empaths take the time to pause and observe, they learn to differentiate between silence that is a temporary personal process and silence that signals deeper relational patterns. They begin to notice subtle cues, the timing, consistency, and context of the withdrawal, which help in understanding whether the quiet is an act of avoidance, a natural pause, or even a challenge meant to foster growth. This discernment prevents unnecessary emotional overreach and allows the empath to act consciously rather than react impulsively. Another profound benefit of reflection is the development of emotional resilience. In the absence of immediate feedback, empaths are forced to sit with uncertainty, discomfort, and even fear. This practice strengthens patience and the ability to remain centered amid ambiguity. It teaches that connection is not defined by constant engagement or verbal affirmation, but by presence, awareness, and integrity. Over time, this resilience becomes a cornerstone of emotional maturity, allowing the empath to maintain balance even when external circumstances feel unpredictable or challenging. Reflection also deepens self-awareness and spiritual alignment. Avoidant silence invites empaths to explore their boundaries, values, and the ways in which they seek validation. By contemplating the motivations behind their reactions, empaths can align their behavior with their higher principles, responding from clarity rather than compulsion. This transforms silence from a source of anxiety into a tool for personal evolution, illuminating not only what is happening around them, but also what is you, enfolding within them. Additionally, reflection nurtures compassion without over-identification. By observing both self and other without judgment, empaths can honor the other person's process while maintaining emotional sovereignty. They learn to hold space for silence without absorbing it as a reflection of personal inadequacy or failure. This balance between empathy and self-preservation is essential for healthy, sustainable relationships. Ultimately, reflection turns silence into an instrument of transformation. It allows empaths to decode complex emotional dynamics, strengthen boundaries, and cultivate inner clarity. Rather than fearing the unknown or attempting to control outcomes, the empath learns to embrace stillness, trust timing, and observe with conscious awareness. In this way, silence becomes a teacher rather than a threat, a sacred space where insight, wisdom, and growth are born. Through consistent reflection, empaths cultivate a deeper understanding of themselves and others, transforming the challenge of avoidant silence into an opportunity for profound personal and spiritual evolution, revealing that true mastery comes not from control, but from conscious presence, patience, and awareness. Thank you for trusting me to share this journey of insight and growth with you. May your path be filled with clarity, courage, and endless light. Goodbye and take care.